The real purpose of the created simulators is, as we know, to recognize the isness life is, the true reality, from the comparison that everything of creation provides. The created simulation of decided and agreed to ideas, generating experience through cause and effect, of that which is not real, but that which we need to go through, that we eventually come to a point where we want to see and be more than what we have restricted ourselves to for the longest time, and as such we reach a stage where we connect with the real awareness, that which we actually are, and the isness that it is a part of, through the NuUU song, and begin to gradually recognize the difference between the simulation and that which is real, the all is, to recognize the is through the comparison that the entirety of creation and all its endless expression of experience affords. Part of this process is a recognition of the consciousness we have been continually creating while going through the body forms in the simulation from a lifetime to a lifetime. For as we create our experiences, as we play in a creation, we accumulate agreements, ideas that we have either created ourselves or those created by others, ideas that through agreement to we have generated the corresponding effected experience that reflects the nature of the ideas. Ideally, we would simply generate all the experience we do to go through a creation and reach the stage of wanting to be more than a simulated effect and see the experiences for what they are, references and comparisons to facilitate awareness through. But as we go through a creation and lifetimes, we have the tendency to cling on to the ideas we create or those of others, and all ideas are taplines, ideas which generates cause and effect experience. As we so make our decisions and agreements, so do we forge the taplines. But were we to have simply made the decision, had the experience, then released the idea, so would it have been but a reference. The tapline would have fallen away. But to cling on to the ideas, has the taplines then retained, and constantly generating the experience that effects from these ideas, and as we move into future lifetimes, as we project the effects beyond that which we can experience in our current lifetime span, so the agreements we become unconscious of, as a new body vehicle comes with a new mind, and the agreements are rather filed in the storage capacity of the personal self, like a computer. but the agreements are retained despite our being now unconscious of them, and are still generating experience based on their nature. With agreements comes the emotional attachment component to ideas also, as we categorize the ideas as good or bad. Generally, the ideas we agree with, we have applied emotion to. Feel-good comfort zone providing ideas overwhelmingly that stimulate the astral sensation body, and what we build up over time is then the consciousness, our simulation generating personal self, an overall vehicle comprising of all the agreements and emotional attachments to the ideas we have decided on, and the bulk of which will be subconscious, that which we are now unconscious of, the taplines that bind us to a creation. Everything operating as per design. The simulator was designed that we experience what we decide based on the ideas we generate and agree with, or the ideas of others, and the ideas we cling to, those that are filed and are the consciousness we constantly are the effects of, until we decide differently, or ultimately supersede and stand in the real awareness nowness indifference to all the ideas of the consciousness and creation, and learn to recognize the ease. So part of the process does involve becoming more aware of the real awareness that we are, a real awareness that is through everything in creation, the consciousness and all the ideas of it, that we can eventually see all the agreements and attachments that make up our consciousness, as we face the personal self and the simulation that generates from it. Fully conscious of our taplines, we are no longer the unconscious effects of our created consciousness, and can then decide as to their release, or cling on to them if we so desire, but to stand as the free beings of light we actually are, we can't be holding on to any created ideas. As the design of the simulators is that we experience simulated effects of the ideas we agree with, and we can only do that in creation. And so, this process of becoming more aware with the real intent of recognizing the ease is to unveil all the agreements and attachments of the consciousness and release them, and to be aware of all the ideas we are creating consciously from moment to moment, endeavoring to maintain our nowness standing real awareness position, and going through the personal self constantly to ensure we are not sitting in any created ideas, attitudes, assumptions, considerations, or convictions. This process will express itself on the real side, in our real side experiences, generally through the consciousness of the personal self being represented by a house, the first floor of which will be the parts of the personal self, that which we are conscious and aware of, The second floor will represent the unseen parts of the personal self, the real side of it. That which most won't consider or even be aware of, and throughout the house will be areas of it that, just like the storage files of our computers, will contain all the agreements and attachments we are unconscious of. Such positions in the house where these unconscious taplines are to be found would include the attic, the basement, anywhere of a house that is not the living areas. And then we would have the back garden as representing the subconscious also. The experiences we have that involve tapline identifying and removing can differ, but very often the recreated house, as representing the personal self, is involved as a point of relatable reference. In this real side experience, then, I would find myself initially in a forest. The forest, in fact, would represent the subconscious in this case, a rather extensive back garden to accommodate the vastness that is the subconscious, because as I proceeded through the experience, so would I move from this forest into my personal self-house from the back of it, indicating that it was indeed my subconscious. For much of a real side experience symbology goes off of old sayings, that of not being able to see the wood for the trees, and with the subconscious being the largest part of the consciousness that is generating the overall simulator, and that which most are unconscious too, so would a forest full of trees, the trees representing ideas, shrouded in the darkness of unconsciousness, be appropriate. And as most are immersed in their personal self-consciousness, and unconscious to the greater part of it, the subconscious, so they can't see the overall of their creational situation. They can't see the wood through all the idea trees that make it up, an overview that would require a stepping into the real awareness that is aside from the simulated consciousness. I would then be confronted with a seemingly endless stream of assailants, and these may represent emotional attachments to individuals or agreements to ideas. Everything in creation is an idea effected into simulation, including the body types. The body types as the vehicle product of idea consciousness agreements. So agreements could very readily be expressed as individuals. If the agreement overall is very convoluted and compounded with many agreement nuances, the overall consciousness of creation is, after all, represented very often by a huge monster. And my impression was here that for every subconscious agreement and attachment I was unearthing in the forest, so would they take the form of individuals, that then I would best in a combat as they attacked me. They would fade away, and the releasing of the taplines they each represented would be achieved. And as we face creation and the consciousness we can place attention on agreements we seek to address and release. Agreements that, as most are throughout our lifetimes, in a controlled reptilian designed matrix, infused with agreements to the controllers, that as we face the agreements, as we place attention on them, as we agree to them effectively, so we can extend the opening for the dark forces with the agreements to the dark forces that are infused and intertwined with our consciousness, that they can feature in the effects, invade our Tapline experience clearing sessions, and attempt their usual disruption. But my impressions were that in this case, these attacking individuals were just manifested representations of Taplines being released. The personal self can express its want to cling on to that which it has held dear for such a time, and the automatic reaction to having its ideas potentially eradicated can often be met with such a simulated attacking response scenario. But evidently these Taplines were released, for had the personal self clung to them and refused to let them go, this would have expressed as probably then a battle with the idea representing individuals that would never conclude, or indeed that they may have bested me. For we do need the cooperation of the personal self, to have it aligned through the 5 bodies of it with the real intent, or we have rather this back and forth struggle. From the forest of my subconscious and into my house I would go, and my Tapline releasing would continue, for it is quite the process to get through the personal self and face it all, and a continuous one, and we must be always conscious of any additional ideas we are adding to the consciousness day by day. I would ascend to the top floor of my house and begin sorting through a number of spare rooms, as these would represent storage areas of the house, the parts of the self we are unconscious of. I would find suitcases full of clutter and documents, agreements and attachments, in other words, as though all contained and inscribed on paper, rather than individual agreements. Then seemed I was unveiling sheaths of agreements all at once, contained in cases, the cases that represented the overall of the individual papers of agreements that made it up. Agreements tend to build upon themselves over lifetimes, as we add further ideas to the original idea, but if we trace the paper trail back to its source, then rather than laboriously remove all the parts, the papers, we can just do away with the original idea, the case containing all the papers, and everything that subsequently stemmed from it, assuming we are willing to, if the personal self is content to delete the entirety of it. And so I pulled out all these cases from the storage spare rooms and hurled them down the stairs. Basically, I was moving them from the unseen, being the unconscious effect, to being conscious of them as they were now on the ground floor, and from there could decide their release, and if decided, this would then present as the cases being removed from the house, as has been the situation in previous real-side experiences of this nature. No longer ideas then that I am holding on to, that are being kept in the personal self-house. Interestingly, as I went about this process, my sister would manifest in my presence and try to convince me not to remove these cases of taplines. With my sister being personal self-immersed and creationally based only, she very much will have, as all unconscious, unaware individuals will, the influence that is a part of the consciousness she clings to, operating through her, or indeed the dark forces that have moulded the consciousness into agreement to their control, can utilize the unconscious unaware as puppets and tapline people through association with them. If you agree and open yourself up to an unconscious one-dimensional being, you agree with the entire package, including the agreements they have through their consciousness to the controllers, and you can then be taplined through them, through that agreement to the reptilians that the individual has. But conscious of this situation, these are taplines that are not maintained, just something to be aware of, unless you maintain agreement with the unconscious unaware longer than is necessary or that makes sense. So either case, here was Lindsay, my sister, influenced or reptilian motivated. For if we are in agreement with the reptilian controllers, we rather conduct ourselves unconsciously in ways that support the controllers, and on the real side, this expresses as interference, distraction, or in this case, Lindsay trying to convince me to cease the releasing of my taplines. And evidently there was agreement or attachment with her that allowed her presence in my simulation on the real side, but I would take no heed of her nonsensical advice. She even would point to another adjoining room where an individual seemed to be dying, and proclaim how, if I proceeded, I would be the cause of his demise. Very possibly this represented death of a part of the personal self, another tapline perhaps, or maybe even the eventual superseding of the personal self in its entirety, the conclusion of releasing all taplines, that the personal self fades away, having served its purpose. And so I proceeded unconcerned, and Lindsay and the dying individual would fade from the house, and the experience concluded, and another satisfying tapline unveiling and releasing session was complete.
Hey Val, Pete here. I
Hi,
wanted to
Pete.
just ask, ask this question concerning Kevin's experience shared and the general practice technique or method that he used. I didn't quite catch that he said this recession was or developed to create his releasing the tap line. You know, he had it organized, it sounded. And so any comment back about how that process was organized?
Well, generally, I don't set necessarily the intent to have tap lines removed. What I tend to find with me is with the overall intent placed with the recognition of the is, then everything to that end will just unfold on the simulated side and on the real side as it does. And of course, in order for the actualizing of the recognition of the is and standing in the true reality as the beings of light that we are, if that is where your intent is placed, then everything must unfold to that end, and that would include then all the releasing of all the tap lines that bind you to creation and prevent that from being so. And so I find with me, it's not a case that I'm managing it or organizing it or deciding what I'm going to do one night to the next. It's just that it unfolds as it does, and I see whatever I'm shown by the real guides or whatever I'm able to bring back, and I just report on the various facets and aspects of these experiences and how they express and how they are represented. And so, as I said, it's not a process that unfolds according to any sort of schedule that I put in place or anything. It's just the simulation that leads to the actualization of wherever my intent is placed. And so, as I said, if your intent is to be with the is, then ultimately that must result in the extricating of all that which prevents you from doing so, which would be the facing of the created self and all the tap lines, and then the deciding to let them go. And so
What I get that, and still, I would just say, in my own experience, way back, and we're talking almost 50 years now, I had a technique given to me, or read, actually. I found this book called The Wisdom of the Mystic Masters, and I read excitedly and gave a technique of researching past life and or spiritual experience. And it was very simple. You know, you focus on your, what they call a third eye, you know, and like that, and ask to have the experience and maybe make a sound. But really it's just kind of laying there before bed, asking for or working to open to having an experience of the kind. And that I did once, and then I repeated the next night. It took 2 nights. And the second night I had a dream. I was taking care of horses as a young, like Indian brave type. At least now I know what the experience was. You know, when you first have these, you don't necessarily really know. But I was with, let's say, one other, taking care of a large number of horses in the prairies, which I now identified as the Little Bighorn battle in the Dakotas. And I was very, you know, a teenager, and there was something going on nearby that I wasn't aware of in the dream, but I knew that was a response and an actual experience to reveal. And so it was a slight bit of an organized process, but not all that much different really than having some form of an intention to create or reveal and or experience. And yeah, so I just wanted to kind of, I mean, reiterating, it's not really different, and but it does have some form of intent to have the experience, and I wasn't actually believing, let's say, in that I was a past life replicant and, you know, had some experience like in the movie The Replicant, if you remember, where he's probably many of the actors who are doing these movies have had these experiences in real past time, and they're repeating their experience in one way or the other, or they're generally were part of that era or time period or experience in history. And so we get all kinds of positions and relations to identify them. And so I'm just saying, okay, later on, about 20 years, I found out that I was just sitting at a table with a number of other, these were Eckankar people, and one of them said, you were such and such, you were with us, and we were the Sioux tribes or one of the Indian tribe, however, that was involved with this whole time era in the late 1870s, 80s, whatever. You know, the Wounded Knee and all of that experience, Indian, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, all of this stuff unfolds with some kind of having our awareness open to doing it. And that's yeah, I hope that adds something, but also I appreciate your answering. And, you know, yes, it isn't actually, I get that, you know, you just do it and allow it. And that is what I'm finding my experience is unfolding, we'll say, is one of the word terms for that, continuously. And it's a wonderful thing to keep with and want to continue to be with this. Of course, the recognitions are not for who or what past life, blah, 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 who or what dream, vision, relation. It except for however it helps us identify, or not even identify, but recognize is. And thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. So about my Tapline experiences or removals, I have a bunch of different things, and I really don't know which one to go into. Many of them are interrelated. I have various dreams, often with members of Eckankar, and some of them are I'm requesting with them that they become aware of what is being shared and or reaching out to them, or that kind of contact, making contact, or in some ways they may, there's the other side where that's kind of the same channel, where by doing so, or by, I am making myself available and making contact with these in different ways, physically or internally, universally, however. And but I'll have these experiences where they come to me, or I'm with them, and usually in a, well, either a very personal way, or a very with a group, and with the EC group of different people's involvement, you know, in different ones, you know. And so I know that this is, that they're taplining, saying we want you to kind of be with us, and instead of not being, instead of them coming kind of to me. But I've had both those experiences also, where it's one, or coming to me, or coming to me and then saying, either one, we want you to be part of our thing, or our family, kind of, that kind of experience is there, and or share in the eating of and the feeding of on this, you know. which would be definitely a Tapline reference, or that I'm trying to show them I'm standing outside of it or I'm leaving it, and I want you to stay with me as a connection. But because that identification is still there of how we work and are connected, you see, it's got a bunch of different coordinations that are, the only way to work with it is through, I get intentionally, and not to be referencing and or trying to coordinate within the old pattern or field of dreams, if you will, really, because that's a limitation within the simulator. And same thing. But it's like it's like swimming in the ocean. Sometimes you're in the ocean and sometimes your body is outside or swimming above it. Does that make sense as a metaphor? I'm just going to say, it feels like that. So that's all I have to say. And any commentaries about how to this is, other than to like completely ignore everybody unless they really have a real honest intent that you pick up. There's no reason to do anything but just to watch the dream or the connection experience, and it is what it is, and you just acknowledge it, and that's it. I suppose that would be an answer that I might hear Duane saying. Because there's another one, and I will relate that one because of listening to this connection guide, new guides, wholeness or individuals, including Duane, and or enlarged by Duane in some cases. Although I don't always know who or what it is in that sense. I can say, yeah, that was Rev Bazaar doing this, or whatever, Phoebe Quant or whoever, whatever might be, and whatever the new guide is, as that. But this one thing is really important, I think, whatever that one thing is, and I don't have names for it, but there is some graduated awareness that I would like to, at right now or currently, want to know. And I think maybe that is an important question, because there's many others that are looking for that wholeness of their recognition, and naturally, quite naturally, universally speaking, and as such, or new universally speaking. And so I'm just using words again, trying to ask in a way, but it's more like a rhetorical question, answering one's own question. But at the same time, I'm not sure that I'm making the question or sharing this validation in the right way or the whole way. But yeah, we do whatever we can do. And so thanks, Val and Kevin again, and Duane. So any commentary on that one, I'll just ask. Thank you.
Well, like in City Slickers, Curly said, it's the one thing, that one important thing. What is it? You got to figure it out. So it's, but being indifferent, just, yeah, like you say, whatever it is, what it is, whatever, there's an indifference, but then at the same time, you're doing something creative to contribute as you're indifferent. So that part is the adventure part of this presentation, is get into the adventure, do something that's dangerous maybe, or like outside your frame of reference and frame of comfort, and do something to contribute to make it more so for everybody else, so they can benefit by becoming more aware as you do. do something. I'll just share something from last show. We were talking about the aliens, and I see it as a breakthrough for some people to be abducted. You could say, just like dreams are a breakthrough, or out-of-body travel. They're opportunities for people to get to see more from what their usual reality is. So I just had this. I remember this experience where I was in. It was in Mountain View, California, probably late '70s, where we have this East-West bookstore. It's a metaphysical bookstore, and they have talks there every week. And this fellow Travis Walton came through. He's promoting his book, or somebody else wrote it about him. Fire in the Sky became a movie too. It was about his alien abduction. He was there with the author, and he still had this look in his eye. I think it happened in the '70s. I may have seen him in the '80s, maybe. But he had this PTSD kind of look in his eye where he was kind of zoned out, that he was talking about his abduction in Arizona. He was a logger. He was with a bunch of his friends. He was kind of the rascal of the group. So they saw this light, this UFO come down or hover over the land, and he went over there to investigate. A beam shone down on him and took him aboard. They did their usual probing. That's what they seem to be. They're interested in us, just like we're interested in them. When we find one of them, we start doing all these experiments on them. So they did what they did with him, and then they were the Greys, the way he described them, 3 of them. And then these 2 tall whites, blonde whites, long hair, came and put a mask, like a oxygen mask or something, over his mouth. He went unconscious, and then next thing you knew, 3 days later, he was on the ground in the forest, back again on Earth. So he told about his experience, and he was doing a tour around the United States talking about it, promoting his book. But I see these as like wake-up calls for people. I mean, in a way, it's an opportunity. It can be shocking, for sure, but it's an opportunity to see more. You're given these experiences, whether they're out of the body or dreams, meetings with aliens. They're opportunities for you to see more of what the regular reality that you live with, the perceptions that you're living with. It's just an opportunity. And it seems like there's more of these going on in the '70s, or I don't know, '60s, when Eisenhower and Roosevelt made deals with the aliens, maybe. And there's a lot more abductions. Now, I don't hear about them too much anymore, but in those days there were more of those. And people reported. They took lie detector tests, and they proved, these people were actually believe what they went through with their experiences. But again, it's a way to see more. It's a wake-up call. You have one of these shockers, and it's like it gives you an opportunity to maybe investigate more that you thought that you knew everything, and now you're going to go and investigate, research, and maybe you'll find Duane the Great Writer and the Real Guides, and you'll see even more through your investigations. So just wanted to share that